Okay, so today's video is a reading of the High Price of Cheap Fashion article. For this reading, I am only going to read the main parts of the article. If you would like to take a look at the other portions, which I so recommend that you do, please make sure that you zoom in, zoom out, and play around with the article before completing the chapter check at the end of the lesson. Let's begin. Belinda A., age 17, goes clothes shopping at least every other week. More often than not, she comes home with a bag full of bargains. Her favorite stores are Forever 21 and H&M because they have a hip vibe, a good selection of trendy outfits, and low prices. One thing she doesn't usually consider: where her clothes are made and by whom. If I see a tag, I'll think about where my clothes come from, but other than that, not really, says I, who graduated in June from Brooklyn Technical High School in New York City. The main issue is affordability. Americans love to shop, and for many like I, the most important considerations are price and style. But some are now taking a harder look at where, how, and under what conditions their clothes are made. Much of the questioning stems from a disaster last April a world away in Bangladesh. A factory building collapsed, killing more than 1,100 workers and injuring 2,500 more. The workers had been making clothes to sell in the United States and Europe for companies like Benetton and The Children's Place. Investigators later discovered that the building owner had illegally added extra floors and allowed the factories inside to install heavy metal equipment that the building wasn't strong enough to support. The deadliest accident in the history of the garment industry, the Bangladesh collapse has led to calls for greater safeguards for workers in third world countries, where most of the clothes are made. Consumers are definitely hooked on walking into a store and buying something cheap and friendly, says Elizabeth Klein, the author of Overdressed: The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion. But more people are beginning to realize there are some hidden costs. Some industry observers have dubbed today's clothing market fast fashion. Clothes are produced so rapidly, a design can go from a sketch to store shelves in just a few weeks, and can be manufactured so inexpensively that the brands can churn out whole new collections month to month. Cheap labor, low prices. Until the 1970s, most of the clothes Americans wore were made in the United States. That's when clothing production, like a lot of manufacturing, including cars and electronics, began shifting overseas where labor costs were much lower. As recently as 1990, 50% of the clothes sold in the U.S. were made in the U.S. Now it's only 2%. Today, most U.S. clothing companies manufacture their merchandise in countries like China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, where factory workers earn a fraction of what U.S. workers make. Cheaper labor costs mean lower prices for shoppers and higher profits for retailers. That's helped make fashion a multi-billion-dollar global industry. And it's changed the way Americans shop. In the late 1920s, the average middle-class woman owned 9 outfits, rotating them until they wore out. As recently as the 1980s, most Americans bought new clothes 2 or 3 times a year as the seasons changed. But by introducing new items continually, stores lured customers into making more frequent purchases. By 1991, Americans were buying about 34 pieces of clothing a year, said Klein. Since then, the U.S. consumption of clothes has doubled. Today, Americans buy on average 68 garments and 8 pairs of shoes a year. At the same time, the cost of clothing has plummeted. Americans today devote about 3% of their spending to clothes, compared with 7% 40 years ago. Clothing has gone from a long-term investment purchase to a disposable good, says Klein. Fast fashion has a lot of parallels to fast food. It's a similar psychology to the dollar menu at McDonald's. You go in all the time for a quick and cheap fix. At the same time, the shift in manufacturing to developing countries has provided jobs to millions of poor people in third world nations. Many of those factory workers toil in sweatshops under unsafe or difficult conditions and for little pay, at least by Western standards. On the other hand, factory jobs provide many people, often rural women living in terrible poverty, with their first paychecks. In China, jobs like this have enabled more than 200 million people to move into the middle class in the last decade. China is the world's largest ready-to-wear clothing producer, but it has lost business over the past few years as its workers' paychecks have grown. The average factory worker in China now makes $1.26 an hour. In nearby Cambodia, a garment worker makes 52 cents. In the US, the minimum hourly wage is $7.25. This article is around 2 years old, so that figure is not accurate anymore. That savings has led major retailers like Gap, Benetton, and Sears to shift some business to Thailand, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. $2 a day in Bangladesh. With 5,000 garment factories employing more than 4.5 million people, Bangladesh is now the world's second leading clothing exporter, after China. Its low wages and loose regulation have helped it attract billions of dollars in orders from Western retailers. Bangladesh has seen some of the worst practices in the global garment industry. Starting at roughly $37 a month, or about 2 hours a day, is their wage. Factory conditions are often unsafe and workers are forced to work long hours. After the factory collapse, Bangladesh's government launched strict inspections and announced plans to raise the minimum wage. We're hoping this will be a game changer and the way that the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was in the United States, says Sally Greenberg, executive director of the National Consumers League, a consumer and workers' rights group, referring to the 1911 fire in a New York City garment factory. Bangladeshi officials warn, however, against drastic changes that might damage Bangladesh's economy. The industry is very important to us, says Mohammed Fazlul Azim, a member of the Bangladesh parliament and a garment factory owner. 14 million families depend on this. 50 major retailers recently signed a pact to spend at least $60 million over the next 5 years to monitor safety in Bangladesh's clothing factories. To pressure Bangladesh to reform, President Obama suspended trading privileges that provide lower import tariffs. Some consumers have begun changing their attitudes about fast fashion too. There's a real demand for sweat-free products, says Ian Robinson, who studies labor issues at the University of Michigan. Consumers don't have the information they need, and they do care. How much more would it cost consumers for clothes to be produced with more worker protections in countries like Bangladesh? Less than 10 cents more per garment, according to one estimate by the National Consumers League. A California yoga-based clothing company called Prana is one of the first American apparel items to be fair trade certified, meaning its factories have been inspected for safety and workers' pay and found to be fair. And the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which includes big names like Gap, Walmart, and Target, has been testing a certification system that starts with environmental goals and will soon include social and labor measurements. An ethical alternative? Klein is optimistic about the potential for change. The era of the $4.99 dress is not going to last forever, she says. Things are going to change not only because consumers want an ethical option, but also for economic reasons. The cost of labor in China is going up. Oil is more expensive, so transportation costs are higher. Grace Donnelly, 20, a sophomore at John Carroll University in Ohio, says she used to frequent stores like Forever 21 and Gap, but as she became more aware of the working conditions in the factories that supply these stores, she's turned to more fair trade clothes. It's difficult on a college budget, Donnelly says. At least you know the clothes you're buying were made sustainably and that the people who made your clothes were paid fairly. So again, I wanted us to take a look at this article to relate it to what we're currently studying in the Gilded Age era. I know it seems kind of weird, but this is something that still exists in parts of the world. I know we talked about the development of the sweatshop yesterday, and it's an important thing to be aware of and really make sure you understand. So now that you've finished the reading, please go take the quiz reflecting on what you've learned, okay? Always write in complete sentences, and always, always, always contact me if you need anything.